Hi, welcome everybody. Welcome to the another episode of Everything Design Show. Today I have Brenda Kang, and she is the owner of Revival Jewels, and she has had more than 20 years of experience in the jewelry field. Previously, she was working with Christie's Auction House based in New York, Europe, and Shanghai, and she opened Revival Jewels in 2013. So her work and her business and herself has been featured in many different magazines over the years, including New York Times Style Magazine, Female, Harper's Bazaar, Wild Jewelry. If you go onto the website, you can see a lot more of her work. So let's say hi to Brenda. Hello, Brenda. Hi, everybody. Hello.
Hi, Nicholas. Hi,
Yeah.
everyone.
Hi. Yes. So, can you just maybe, give us a little bit of a summary or just a quick introduction? What is Revival Jewels? Just for people who have no idea what it is or what Revival Jewels is about.
Sure. So I started Revival really as from this love of vintage jewelry, and when I left Christie's, I noticed that there wasn't anyone in Asia who was doing it. Just specifically vintage jewelry, like a store dedicated to selling vintage pieces. And so I started it really from a personal love of it, and so we're the only one so far in Singapore that is dedicated to sourcing and selling pieces which are a little bit more collectible, curated, and also wearable. So I think essentially. The shop offers collectors a chance to see pieces that you don't often get a chance to handle and look at in Singapore, but also in a lot around Southeast Asia or Asia, in fact.
Yeah. So with Revival Jewels, you have a storefront in Wheelock, right? So
Yes.
if anybody would like to go to the store on level 4, you have to make an appointment, and of course we'll do that after the circuit breaker, and you can go out and do your shopping. But for now, you can definitely look at the website, which I'll post the links in the descriptions of the podcast and of course on the video as well. But I guess jewelry is something that I think a lot of people own some form of jewelry, right? Like I saw there were watches, there were brooches, necklaces, and different types of jewelry. So I think most people own jewelry, but how do you get into a career of of into the world of jewelry, of buying and selling jewelry? How does a journey like that start?
So I used to work in the airlines, and through my travels, I found myself being exposed to pieces that you don't have a chance to see in Singapore growing up. So I think if you think about growing up in the 70s or 80s in Singapore, maybe you'd know about goldsmiths. Chain stores like maybe On Chong or some other sort of local stores, and maybe at most you can see some Cartier or the bigger brands. But if you go to London, for example, or New York, you'll see that there's actually a lot more variety in terms of vintage pieces, a lot more it's a lot more mainstream in Europe and US. So it really opened my eyes, and especially going to all the museums as well, that sort of really piqued my interest. And so when I left the airlines, I took a course on gemology at GIA, Gemological Institute of America, to be a gemologist. And then from there, it was just pure luck that after about a year or so in local retail store, I managed to get a position as a trainee specialist, so junior specialist, based out of New York City. So I went over in 1997, and it was really the best place to get started to learn. It's like thrown into the deep end, basically, because you are seeing and appraising jewelry on a day-to-day basis. You might see around 100 over pieces just coming through.
Wow.
And of course, as a trainee, I worked a lot with more senior specialists. As I started, it was really more to support them, and then learning on the job to meet clients, do appraisals. We had to meet lawyers as well, dealing with estates, and so you get it because New York City was really the hub for America and even South America. People were sending us pieces all the time, and so it was a really good learning ground to be exposed to everything from big gemstones like 100-carat diamonds to Art Deco 1920s pieces or Art Nouveau. It really ran the gamut in New York City. So it was the best place for me to learn and be exposed and to touch and handle all these pieces.
Yeah.
So that's really my journey, and then when I had the opportunity to move from New York to Paris for personal reasons, I basically then was exposed to even more to different markets. So got a chance to see the European market and how that was different from the US. And then from Europe, I moved to China as well. So it was a really good. I was very fortunate to be able to have that exposure to the jewelry world in all of these places where Christie's had offices. And then so when I finally moved back to Singapore and came back to see that the market here, it was non-existent, and I think because not many people were exposed to it, and so the initial feeling for vintage when I first started, many people were saying, "Oh, you'll never make it. You should really be selling in Hong Kong or or somewhere where jewelry is worn a lot more and people have a greater appreciation for it." So, but I decided, I had nothing too much to lose, then that I felt quite strongly about it. So I decided to start in Singapore anyway. And so I left Christie's mainly because I coming back to Singapore, the things that I was seeing around Asia was mostly contemporary pieces, and I just had a gut feeling about how the vintage market would change, and so I'm really glad I did it.
Yeah. So I mean, you mentioned about how there was I guess a perception that in Singapore there wouldn't be that many, you wouldn't be able to make it, right? There were a lot of people who had that apprehension at first.
Yes.
But what was the sensing at the start in 2013? With the business, what was how would you describe your main clientele? Who were the clients? What did they buy? In general.
So I was very, again, fortunate to have clients who were very supportive when I first started, and so that helped a lot. It was not a big group, but I would try to source for things that they might like, and so we would the clients that did come to buy from me were clients that I had already sort of established a strong relationship with, and then slowly they told their friends, and usually sort of like-minded people gather together. So it built up, very slowly. I would say it was not a very the first two years was challenging and sometimes a little bit worrying, but we managed to make a profit in our second year. Not a big one, but I mean, in the sense that I feel the interest was there, and it just needed time for people to to understand it and to be exposed to it, to have a chance to see it and handle it and try it on, and then the perception changes. Definitely, there are a lot of people who came like, oh, this is secondhand. Who's worn it? What kind of superstition comes with it? And they have a good life, or how did they die? That sort of question
Okay.
I hear a lot.
Yeah.
And so and usually when someone comes and asks those questions, I normally say, well, if you're a bit more of the superstitious type, then maybe this is not for you, because you should really be buying these pieces with with a happy heart, and that you would enjoy them and not worry all the time about, oh no, who's owned it and etc. And so, but one of the things which I learned was a really good lesson about the business is that you just can't think locally. And I think my business really changed when I took it upon myself to get out there and do trunk shows in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and just trying my luck to put up just a small gathering of people, and then sort of word gets around and build on those relationships. And I think that really helped me a great deal.
Yeah. So just based on what you're describing, I would imagine that your market is definitely not mass market. We're not going to see these pieces everywhere. The clientele as well as your target audience also would be, some would say maybe a bit more atas, or a higher social status. But then how is it different? How would you say it's a little bit different in terms of, I think you mentioned about how you were able to grow that clientele through friends. But do you think that there are any techniques that you've learned, or tips that you've learned over the years, to say that, hey, when I'm trying to sell something to a target audience that's of a slightly higher social status as compared to mass market, all right, mass market, general for the general public, are there any differences when you think about it, or do you think actually it's quite similar in that sense?
Oh yeah, definitely big difference. And I think that we try to be quite democratic. I mean, we have a lot of, it may seem on the get-go that the things that we have is all like very atas and more high end, but we do have a selection of things which are affordable. I mean, if you can go and buy a handbag from whatever brand, if you have that sort of money set aside, then definitely there's jewelry that we have that you could afford that's different. And it's just a matter of perception sometimes. And so we try. It's actually a very difficult. It is difficult to try and balance between the two, like being able to have things that will appeal to I wouldn't say mass, but to a wider audience, and versus, of course, some things which are definitely for a different group of people who have a much higher spending power. So we try to have both, because I feel that it's important to sort of grow that the wider audience as well, to eventually one day hopefully get to a point where they might be able to afford something that is sort of a different price level, a higher price level. But I feel with vintage, actually there's definitely a lot of savings. In fact, if you compare prices with sometimes what you might have to pay for at retail, buying vintage, it's still a collecting category in which I feel is a little undervalued. And if you make a comparison, like if you compare sometimes a piece which is by a brand name, depending on what it is, of course, I mean, but generally speaking, the quality in terms of the workmanship, the quality in terms of the design, and sometimes even the materials used, you will see that there is great value in terms of vintage pieces that you can find out there. It's just a matter of having the right the eye to look at what's worth buying and knowing sort of market prices. I know you collect watches as well, right?
Just started.
So I think it's sometimes you find that there is value in collecting things which have a great aesthetic appeal, and it doesn't necessarily mean that just because it was secondhand it's not good, but it's just, and it could be even more rare. And I feel that there is still potential for growth in terms of vintage. And I think with a lot of people also feeling, with sustainability, there's definitely a lot out there that can be, that in a way recycled. But the things that I try to bring in, I put on my old specialist hat in a way, and I think about what are the pieces that will be good in terms of resale. So if you were to buy something, at what value, the kind of designs that are timeless, yet still very trendy and wearable today. So all of those factors come in together, and so I think it isn't easy to satisfy every category of buyer, but I think the great thing about dealing with vintage is that you can try to have a different selection in the boutique that can be appealing to different groups, and so and yet still hopefully have an identity for the brand.
Of course, yeah.
For the Revival brand,
yeah. Because the pieces that I saw, some didn't have any brands, but they were very detailed, still very beautiful. And I think when you mentioned about the watches that I've also started to collect, and the watches that I've been starting to look at also. It's a whole world that you need to understand, right? It's if you buy a Rolex, for example, or you buy a Tudor, there's so many. There's a chance that you might buy a fake one, you buy a second-hand one, you buy a brand new one. Then the market prices are fluctuating differently depending on the season or the popularity of a particular piece. So there's so many different factors that impacts that purchase for somebody, right? Whether they buy an $18,000 green Rolex, or they buy a very similar functionality, similar quality in terms of the materials, in terms of the steel, in terms of the glass, but the brand is not there, or the heritage may not be there with a different Seiko, right, which is maybe $1,000. Which is about 5% of the 5% of the price that you have in that sense. So I mean, I think the brand plays quite a big part for the the watch world, right? Does it play a huge part, or as big as a part in terms of the jewelry world as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to buying jewelry, having a brand can increase the value of a piece, around 3 times to maybe 5 times, sometimes even more. So I definitely would say that's one way in which you would you would say that having the brand name definitely adds a certain higher value and collectability, but it doesn't mean that something that isn't signed isn't just as good to collect, and isn't just as is poorer in comparison. So and I think I try to have both, so that the clients who are maybe looking for things which are a little bit more affordable, but yet still has a intrinsic value and a great sense of design, that can be a little bit more for the mass market, and yet being a little bit more unique and different. So which is a very interesting, I mean, it's a very interesting discussion, because I think when it comes to design or products even,
there's always this discussion of value, right? Where do we place our value? And one of your clients may sort of see the value in the workmanship, the level of bespokeness, how unique the piece is, and other clients may see that value in terms of that brand, right? So there needs to be a little bit of diversity in terms of the items or the jewelry you're selling as well. Or some people it's also about how old the item is. Maybe, you know, to them it's, I want to own something that's 100 years old or 200 years old. You know, so yeah, I think that's definitely something that plays a part, right? But with that in mind, I mean, with this idea of value, right? Do you think that in Asia, we hold more, we place more value on certain aspects as compared to you know, the Europeans, you know, and if there is, and where do you see that change? Where do you see that value being placed in, you know, in terms of a market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when we're selling in the US or Europe, most clients, I would say 99% of them will not ask, will this go up in price? Like, how much can I get in 10 years? And what's the per carat price for this item? You know, they don't ask these things. And they in Europe and the US, they really do mostly buy for pleasure and for gifting, or for sentimental reasons even. So, but in Asia, definitely the value is placed on almost, often buying in sort of like just diversifying their portfolio, but yet looking good at the same time. And so you do have most Asian buyers thinking about the value behind collecting or buying a piece of jewelry, and so the mindset is very different. I find, for the most part. Of course, there are exceptions, but for the most part, so they'll place value on, for example, the thing which I sell well, or like for someone who's starting to collect, they would understand, perhaps someone who has already bought jewelry, maybe from a local jeweler, and they might be able to compare, okay, this has X amount of diamonds, so 10 carats of diamonds, and what kind of color and clarity, and then how much gold is there, all added up together, so that they get a sort of like a rough idea in terms of price value if you were to go and make something like that today. And I think that that kind of train of thought is very common in Asia, for someone, especially someone who's just starting to collect, right? So and in that sense, sometimes vintage can be quite attractive, because if you were to break it all down, it can be much more attractive in pricing than buying something that is brand new.
I see. So let's say if like let's say I had let's say a budget of $10,000, right, for example, and I could come in and buy a piece from you that has a potential for higher sort of market value in the long run, maybe, as compared to, let's say, if I go to a Poheng or Li Hua, or one of our popular local brands, like a lot of Singaporeans do go to, because of, and that may be an option if we're looking at something that's long term, as a sort of an investment.
Perhaps.
Perhaps,
perhaps. And I would say it's put it this way, because most of, at least, and this is all, of course, very general, because there's also a lot of different kinds of vintage out there. There are a lot that are very mass-produced vintage, even in the Victorian era. The Victorian era, there was this industrial revolution, and a lot of jewelry was mass-produced as well. So, but the kind of things that we try to bring in tend to be one of a kind, and pieces which are a bit more unique, that you may not find everywhere, and it's not usually mass-produced jewelry, and where, like, a lot of it was made, and that in itself is already a good way to think about when you think about collecting, that it's like limited edition or one of a kind. and where the workmanship perhaps is very hard to reproduce again today to that kind of level. Maybe they can reproduce it, but not to the same finesse. So so definitely, there is, if you know how to look and you spend enough time to learn and to understand, in terms of what you pick and what you want to put your money into, definitely there's a lot out there. There's good value that you can find in vintage.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a I mean, from a purely investment perspective, right? That they people are always talking about how you invest in property or stocks or other things, but the idea of the discussion of or buying into gold or jewelry, it does come up sometimes, and I think it's very unique that in Europe or in the States, this whole idea of gifting or buying purely for the idea of pleasure, it's a very different mindset to how the Asian community sort of think in that sense. It's to say like, I buy something, not just, I cannot purely buy something for pleasure, and it has to be for pleasure. It has
good
to be
value,
good value in that sense, right? And it's quite. And I think it's very difficult. It's a very difficult sort of thing to try and get our heads around, in a sense, because as a person who's trying to sell things or trying to figure out what the market might be interested in buying, there's so many things to consider when I would imagine when you're thinking about what pieces should I be bringing in. It's not just about how beautiful a piece is, because beauty is also something that's quite subjective in that sense, or how amount of details or the made of gold. Then you have to think about also is there any potential resale value, or will it hold its value in that sense, right? So quite interesting to see, to hear about how this these different elements about
come in. And I would actually always tell my clients, and whenever I get asked about this, I say, actually, don't think of jewelry as an investment, because a lot of it also depends on when you buy it, how much you paid for it, and when you plan to sell it, right? And do you have a platform to sell it in? Because I could say all these things about great value and all that, but when it comes down to it, it also is important to keep all of those things in mind. So when you buy something without thinking about just pure investment, when you buy something because for the love of it and how much you appreciate the work that goes into it, and the design of it, or that you get a lot of pleasure from wearing it, and then to pass it down to future generations, or to create your own stories for that particular piece of jewelry, or to mark a milestone, for example, even, like, I think those are the things that really sort of add value, even more value to buying something. And then the plus point, of course, is it is a fact that most of the things that, a lot of things can hold its value well, and will be something, if you choose wisely and sell at the right time, it can be great for you as well. But first and foremost, it should be all of the other things which I mentioned, that that brings you pleasure, and that you create your stories and your own provenance that comes with it, that really does have a much bigger impact, I think, in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, actually, the point that you just made, I think it's driving home multiple layers within that message, right? I mean, number one, you're sort of talking about appreciating and putting time into thinking about a purchase, and not rushing into that purchase, and thinking about the emotional connection you have with that purchase, appreciating it for its beauty, its workmanship, all these kinds of things. And it when you spoke about that, I'm thinking about how, from a very consumeristic sort of landscape, in the world now,
Yeah.
where, let's,
Yeah.
buy and consume as many things as possible. Like you realize that, my house is
Mm.
filled with junk. I mean, you can see behind me, if,
Yeah.
in my bookshelf, there is a lot of junk that I buy. And I think I personally am trying to start to
Mm.
go down that path where, I don't need to purchase everything, but if I can purchase one or
Mm.
two items that hold very sort of strong
Mm.
connections for me or meaning for me, or there's
Yes.
a strong sense of beauty. I think
Yes.
that's where as a society it's actually worth going down, because
Absolutely.
I don't think people, it's not that people can't afford, like for example, let's say a 5,000, if you're a middle
Mm.
class family, a $5,000
Mm.
piece may sound very expensive. It does sound very expensive, or $10,000 piece does sound very expensive. But if we think about it,
Mm.
is it about if I'm a bit more, not say prudent, but a bit more conscious in my other purchases, like, am I buying a
Mm.
$30 or $40 meal when I could have a $5 meal? Am I constantly having
Mm.
buying random, pieces of equipment for the house which I don't really need? And those
Yeah.
$10, $20, $40, $30, it grows, and it contributes to
Mm.
that big, and if you realize that if you cut all of this out, actually to get to that $5,000 or even that few $1,000s, it's not
Mm.
that difficult. So I do agree
True.
in what you're saying, where when we
Mm.
buy items, I think the conversation of vintage or buying
Mm.
pre-owned, there is an underlying message behind that, I feel.
Yeah.
And there are the stories behind these pieces, who own the pieces.
Mm.
And also there
Mm.
may be, you build your own stories as well, right? For example, let's say if,
Yes.
with my first paycheck, I
Yeah.
bought a watch, or
Mm.
it could be a gift from, like, for my wife, or my son,
Mm.
or my mom.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think these stories are worth holding on to.
Yes.
And I think that's something that's very, very, I think this is a very important thing when we're talking
Mm.
about purchasing, and as well as the value of design, I feel, as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Those are all the things that I agree with 100%. Yeah.
So, I mean, would you feel? I mean, you've had this business going for about a good
Mm.
7 years, almost 7 years, or 7 years or so, right?
Mm.
Do you
Mm.
think that the type of clients that you were getting, do you see that
Mm.
as changing as well? Do you think, like,
Mm.
based on our discussion that we have, do you find your clients are changing in terms of, maybe it's the perception that they have, or the perception on jewelry, or is it
Mm.
maybe an age group or things like that? Do you see that your clientele, or the market that you've been engaging with, has changed over the years?
Yeah. I think that uh, definitely a change in it, two different ways. I would
Okay.
say
Yeah.
one is that is a group of people who may have only been buying modern contemporary jewelry or
Mm.
gemstones, for example. People who would perhaps in the past only collect gemstones for value. For
Mm.
example, they might buy big diamond, or they might only buy like sapphires. We are slowly beginning to see the beauty, or the joy, a piece of beautifully made vintage can give you, in the sense that, if let's say you think about buying a Van Cleef or a Cartier that's from the 1950s, and it's something that
Mm.
you can still wear today because it's in yellow gold and just simple but yet very classic and strong designs that change an outfit altogether.
Mm.
I'm seeing that change. I'm seeing
Mm.
someone who may not have considered buying gold jewelry in the past because for whatever reasons they didn't feel that there was value in it. They're starting to see that actually there is value. Prices have been very strong and been going up in the market,
Mm.
and at the same time, it's pieces that they can wear every day. So
Mm.
they feel like it's not stuff that, like a big diamond, you have to sort of put in the safe and you only take out on
Mm.
special occasions. So that's one group. And then the other group that I'm seeing is the young sort of millennials and I don't even know, it's Gen whatever now, but they are looking,
yeah,
yeah,
younger than that.
not quite getting married yet, but
Yeah.
yeah, younger than, but the the looking for an engagement ring that is sustainable,
Mm.
looking for wedding jewelry that is more unique and
Mm.
again, that is that would be different from what everyone else is wearing in terms of an engagement ring. Maybe all their friends will think about like getting a Tiffany engagement ring,
Mm.
or just getting a diamond from a jeweler, and then creating their own things. There's this other group that has started to feel they would love to have something that has a story behind it,
Yeah.
and a more unique design, that could be one of a kind. So yeah, we're seeing that change for sure.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think. I mean, from a sustainability perspective, that we are seeing. I mean, I'm seeing quite a few groups, starting to become more sustainable within the creative field as well. Whether it's the materials that they use, or whether it's the messages that they're trying to sort of send across with their works. There's also quite a lot of people who are, doing their own, using their own sort of sustainable materials. When they're or even buying food with their own containers. So we can start to see. I think from a market wise,
Yes.
we can start to see that. And I think when they do make these life decisions, right, or I need to get married, or I need to propose to my wife, my fiance, in a sense, to my girlfriend,
Yeah.
and I need to buy these big ticket items. And I think it ties really nicely and ties really well to the message that we were thinking about, discussing about just now, with this whole idea of building those stories, building about sustainability. And I think that as a society, we are starting to see a greater push for some of these values as well, and these messages as well. So which is really good. So as a business owner, now that you are, you're stuck at home, I'm sure you still can run aspects of your business. But how are you finding how are you finding the market now, being in the circuit breaker with COVID? How are you sort of finding opportunities to get more clients, or find more opportunities for your business? Are you looking at new alternatives, or are you looking at new channels as well?
So I think, well, what we're trying to do is to be a little bit more active on social media, but at the same time being very careful on social media, or on these platforms, not to be too commercial. So we're really sort of trying to step up our game in terms of what we're posting, and trying to make it a little bit more informative, educational, entertaining, so that it doesn't come across as if we're just trying to sell jewelry during this time. So basically being a bit more sensitive to that, and so I would say content on social media is really important. I think we've had quite a few good sales that have come through Instagram, for example, which was very surprising for me. But I think that's the new reality of business these days, and especially so for jewelry. But I think that's one way, which is social media, and then reaching out to clients through newsletters. And so a lot of what I do in terms of trying to close sales and do sales is really through like WhatsApp and WeChat. It's very personal, and I think the jewelry business especially, it's a very relationship-based business. I haven't quite figured out yet how to do it sort of just purely online. In other words, like online sales. We do have prices on there, so someone could actually just email us and say, okay, we're interested in this. We don't have a lot of that. We occasionally have clients who find us through Google, but somehow with the website itself, it online sales on websites, it's not as. I think clients still want, people who buy still want to have that interaction, and to speak to me and to know more about the pieces. And so in terms of what we're doing, we're really just thinking more in terms of Instagram, and then reaching out to clients directly, making sure they're okay, and we are, we're also now thinking, for example, sending little jewelry care kits to some clients,
okay.
and then we're also planning events. So I'm part of the Diamond Exchange of Singapore. We're thinking about doing an event in association with the opening of the Asian Civilizations Museum Jewellery Gallery.
Wow, okay.
And so we're keeping busy with that, and we want to be ready once circuit breaker is over and we can do small group events. Still not going to be a big event. It's like very targeted small groups that will be led through with with social distancing in mind and everything. But to do an exhibition that is, again, a bit more educational, talking about the different cuts of diamonds and jewelry through the different periods, and also supporting some younger jewelry designers in Singapore. So we're planning these events in addition to thinking about sort of our posts and social media. So that's keeping us a little bit busy as well. So and we're also thinking about collaborations. We haven't found one yet, but definitely would love to collaborate more, and with whether it's with online media or maybe with a fashion company. Those are the few things that we've been thinking about to do something different from what we normally do. Because on a day-to-day basis, Revival is a very small team. Basically, it's myself and I have one office manager who does most of the back office work. So because we're such a small team, it really does limit the amount of time that I can spend on things, and the amount of things that I can do. So
Yeah, I mean that sounds. I mean, as we're all into the circuit breaker now, I think, I think the strategy that you've taken, I think a lot of businesses are also doing very similar strategies where they've moved digitally, and they've used social media. So I've seen a lot of restaurants or hawkers that used to be selling maybe their noodles or their dumplings online. I mean on the store, but now they pre-pack it, they put it in a different way. They rather than sell it cooked, they sell their dumplings frozen, and they ship it over, or they do delivery. So I think it's caused quite a disruption, definitely, but I think it's brought about that disruption within these different industries. And I think for you yourself, it's not just about selling the jewelry up front, but it's also about creating, educating the public about the types of jewelry. So when I read about some of the posts, you were talking about the auctions. You were also talking about the types of jewelry that was there. You were talking about I think about the particular brands or the heritage of some of the types of pieces. So you're building that kind of knowledge within that industry to educate people a little bit more, and in your tactics, your techniques in terms of looking for different points of collaboration with other businesses. I think that's something that we are definitely starting to see, and I think it's a positive within a fairly a very serious a time that we're living in now. But I feel that this is actually a positive, and I think I think post COVID, these businesses can still sell their things online. They will still maintain their original customers that were going to them pre-COVID, but now they would have new customers like me who's like, hey, I wouldn't mind buying dumplings pieces from you, 48 pieces at at $20, or I wouldn't mind buying your frozen food or some of your items that you previously were selling, and I feel that helps to diversify what they were originally doing in the start. So I think a lot of businesses now, and I think not just traditional businesses, brick and mortar, but I think design businesses, services as well. We all need to start thinking about how we can, create more knowledge within the our fields. And I think I also see a lot of design companies also doing that, right? Like there's a design studio that's sort of doing their own shows or writing different articles about their field of design, and I think as a whole, it's a very good path to take, to be able to not just move digital for the sake of moving digital or just to sell the items purely as like a menu, but to build that knowledge, to educate people, as well as to, I think, have that conversation going, right? I mean, I think, even from today, hopefully we can get that conversation going to say that, hey, actually within jewelry, it's not that you can't buy mass market items. Mass market items have their value, but think about the alternative as well, which is maybe a little bit more sustainable. There are pieces that are a bit more unique. So maybe come to revival and for those qualities and those values, right? So I think that's something that we're also we also want to be able to do with having more podcasts and more conversations with more people. So I mean, whoever's listening, if they would like to have a conversation to sort of talk about how things have changed, or to just educate the general public about some of these new or not say new, but these different fields, please drop me a message and let me know. So I guess that sounds like we spoke about quite a lot of different things. I'd like to thank Brenda for her time.
Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for sharing
it's great.
with us.
I love your podcast. I think it's so important to highlight that, for to think about design at the forefront, and that it's important for people who are coming out and trying to find jobs as well. I feel like this is all a great opportunity, a great time for designers to come out and help small medium companies like myself also to think differently, and to up their game in a way, to really sort of revamp and do better.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were also mentioning, in a chat we had through WhatsApp, so talking about how when you started, rather than going to your bigger agencies to get all the design work, you were hiring a lot of freelancers for the logos, the website. I think your printers, architecture, the shop space. So I think this really sort of, within times like these also, when people are a bit more cautious with money, of course we still have to pay out designers, right? But when you're thinking about rather than paying a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars for an organization or a company to help you do your work, I think designers freelancers can help you solve those problems at a cheaper rate, but still get the job done, and I think that's in times like these we need to really promote the designers that are out there, and also try and spur designers to be a little bit more adventurous, entrepreneurial in that sense, to say that, maybe I need to start coming out, and build my own platform, show my work. Because I think a lot of I think a lot of my even when I was looking at a lot of my students' works, I was very surprised, when to see the works that they could do on social media, and the things that they've been posting. So I really think that using these digital platforms that we've had, to showcase the works, to grow, and you never know, you send your work
Very
out to
important.
to 100 people, you can
Mm.
get one or two clients, right? So and
Yeah.
we don't need mass market to sort of reach out to a million people and get 10 cents worth of every person that I reach. But I think getting one or two clients that is good for that can kickstart your journey. I think that's a good perspective as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And networking is very important. So I feel like there's all of that, and then develop good networks, and that I think is also quite vital to being known, and and for you to be successful, I think. So yeah,
Definitely,
for sure.
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Thank you very much for your time,
Thank
Brenda.
you. Yeah, thank you as well.
Thank you
All
everybody
the
for listening. Thank you for listening to us. And for if you're interested in anything that we've been discussing today about Revival Jewels, I will put the links in the descriptions, and please feel free to contact Brenda if you have any inquiries, and maybe you're looking for your new engagement ring or your new wedding ring or your new jewelry that you may want to give to your loved ones. Yes. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
We'll see you around. Thank you. Say bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye.